Okay, folks, we're going to do this the second time today. Um, my name is Nicholas Knight. I am the journalist and owner of the Daily Counter News. And I want to start and explain why we created the Daily Counter News. A few years back, when COVID started, we noticed that a lot of the mainstream media outlets were basically fear mongering stories on COVID and everything. And it gave us a kind of an idea of, hey, as journalists, this isn't what we're supposed to do. As we have an obligation to tell the story, tell the facts, and let people make up their own minds. So that's kind of how the Daily Counter News came around. We are not anchor people, so you kind of have to bear with us when we do these podcasts. We're learning on the fly here. We're journalists, which is a written word, so that's kind of how we are accustomed to things. So we also decided to cover family courts in South Carolina. Not the he said, she said aspect of it, but the aspect of the lack of constitutional protections, the lack of a actual system, a court system. We we are having technical issues still. So bear with me just a second here. Saying YouTube is not responding. Okay, this is always interesting. There we go. Okay, gotta love modern technology. And we do understand that there is a delay between us broadcasting and you guys receiving it with live streams. Uh, but anyways, back to what I was saying was that's kind of how it came about to the Daily Counter News. One of the stories that we started off with was Ashley Kidwell, and we were privy to all her information, all her history, and everything. Which, when we started the story, we weren't sure where it was going to go. We initially wanted to show how a DV victim empowered herself, fought for her kids, fought for her freedom, found a loving relationship, and everything. But unfortunately, the story didn't end up that way. Um there's so much information that we couldn't put in the articles that we're hoping that this new platform that we're trying also allows us to give you guys more information to these subject matters that we just couldn't put in the articles because unfortunately we can't write War and Peace on our sites. So one of the things that we didn't put in there in the first article was that her first hearing, when she had left her husband, found this loving relationship, moved in with him, there were a lot of things that just didn't make sense to us in the beginning. The involvement of her mother, her own biological mother, bringing the husband to where she was at, claiming she had been kidnapped and all this stuff. Luckily, Ashley had documentation from the court that there was no contact order. The law enforcement officers, credit to them in Richland County, informed them that if they didn't leave, they would be arrested and trespassed and so forth. Um, which that was something that intrigued us because this was her own mother doing this. And we dug into that and we spoke with Ashley about it, and she informed us of a million different things about her mom. Now, when we speak about her mom, we're talking about Jamie Domingo Russell. And this is an individual who herself has a history of drug and alcohol and just numerous aspects. Uh, According to Ashley, her mother Jamie was the one that introduced her to alcohol and drugs at the age of 13, which we found kind of interesting. Apparently, Jamie Russell was a realtor up around Charlotte, very well known. According to Ashley, did some major deals up there. But at the same time, there was a backside to it. She used a lot of the homes for parties for teenagers and stuff. Fast forward, there was an accident. She was supposed to receive a reward. She fell off a boat, was severely injured, had major brain blood loss and everything. And that kind of kick-started a lot of the trauma for Ashley, even beforehand, apparently. We won't get into some of the aspects that we just don't feel are our story to tell in this section of it when it comes to Ashley, but we will just state this, that a lot of the trauma that Ashley endured prior to her marriage came from her mother, which is another thing when we talk about domestic trauma, is we understand domestic violence as spouse or boyfriend and girlfriend, but it also is family members. When we started talking to professional psychologists and stuff, they immediately jumped on that bandwagon and told us a lot of it comes from family members, and these victims are predisposed to this by a parent or a family member that has kind of set their wiring program for this. And in Ashley's case, Ashley's programming started early on. She comes from a broken home. Her father, a very kind-hearted man, very caring man, just couldn't take it anymore, divorced. Ashley and her brother were placed with family members and so forth. Jamie actually didn't have custody of either one of her children at any point afterwards. It wasn't until later that Ashley lived with her mom for a while. But it began the programming, and this is a vital key, is when we talk domestic violence, we have to understand that this doesn't just happen overnight. Several of the professionals we spoke to informed us that this is a slow process of programming, whether it is financial, emotional, physical. There are multi-levels of domestic abuse. So in Ashley's case, it was a lot of mental abuse that she underwent. There was some physical abuse, but it was mostly the mental that rewired her brain. She doesn't have the ability to make rational decisions. And she's told us this herself. She understands this. She told us that she used to have a habit, and still does, of just jumping in cars with people she doesn't even know, and just driving off with them. These are things that she's informed us of and that she still does. She has a loving, caring nature. But she also has told us that she convinces herself of things so quickly and so harshly that there's no diverting her from things. So, in the time that we've covered Ashley's story, when Ashley first left, she went to every agency in the state of South Carolina to try to get help. She did self-medicate openly, with alcohol and pills. The pills she got from her mom. Again, Jamie Domingo Russell gave her daughter pills, and we assume, and Ashley kind of led us into this, is that it was a way of her mom controlling her. Ashley made a statement to us one time that she felt her mom was jealous of her, of how she looked, of how much attention Ashley got. The odd thing about this is that at one point, Ashley actually commented to us that Jamie Domingo Russell had plastic surgery done to make herself appear like Ashley, which kind of shocked us, but it is what it is. So, as the process went on, and Ashley went to all these agencies, she was living in the house with someone who actually cared about her and she was deeply in love with. Her mom didn't like it because there was no control factor for her there. But Ashley was denied by all these agencies, citing COVID restrictions, COVID issues. So when Ashley went to her first court hearing, The representative that was there from Sister Care was denied access to the courthouse. From what we understood, and we actually had a journalist there who overheard this, they denied access, claiming COVID restriction that if the person didn't need to be in the courtroom, they weren't allowed in. And this was a domestic violence advocate that was not allowed in to stand next to the victim in front of a court, which really shocked us. What we found out later was that Ashley was cornered by a DSS attorney out of Kershaw County and opposing counsel and basically bullied into agreeing to a custody arrangement, or was told basically you agree to it or we're putting the kids in foster care right now. So as most people can understand, a victim who's been mentally brutalized, physically brutalized, kind of just bows down to these sort of tactics. And she agreed to the visitation arrangement, custody arrangement, and was let go. So, in the process, her mom kept influencing her, kept contacting her to come, stay with her. The kids had to be at her mom's place for the visits and all this stuff. Again, her mom executed that control factor over Ashley through the kids now. While she was at the house with the gentleman she was with, Ashley didn't drink, didn't take pills, nothing. She was actually sober. She had night terrors for a long time that we were informed of, that the only way she could get through them is by the gentleman holding her and her knowing that he was there keeping her safe. So, in conversations we've had with Ashley, we found out that the only relative that Ashley actually considered family at that point was her brother. When he passed at her mom's, it was a very shock for Ashley. It kind of started the downward spiral that she has set her path on. Her mom would take her to see lawyers with no intention of ever getting one for her, even though her mom had the money. Ashley was aware of this. Ashley was aware that her mom didn't want her to have the children. It would set her on the same path as herself. So these sort of things we couldn't put in articles. These are things that Ashley told us, and we just couldn't figure out a way to put them on paper and make them, impactful. One of the reasons we chose Ashley, now here's a secret to any good journalist, any story you read when you read about a certain individual, is a good journalist will do a day in the life of. And when we talked about domestic violence, Ashley was that day in the life. Like I said, we wanted to show how a victim became courageous, fought, and we were hoping to win. But that's not exactly the way it played out. Throughout the time span, Ashley's mother has pawned her off on gentlemen who we, in getting ready for this podcast, have discovered have posted private videos of Ashley and these gentlemen on certain sites. That we are aware that Ashley was aware of being recorded. We're not sure if she was aware of them being posted. More than likely not. But in the process of this whole time span with Ashley's story, she kept reaching out to the gentleman who she was involved with, knowing that they were linked together, that they were one, as they said, one soul. But here's the thing. Ashley wasn't the only victim we spoke with or watched or researched. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just getting over a sinus infection. So, other victims we had spoken to in our research stated the same thing, that the court systems really let them down. There was no legal help for a victim unless you stayed at a certain facility or had connections to a certain group. They would send advocates to stand by you, but that was it. Another aspect was there was no financial support for these victims that were financially dependent. The help, basically, from what they explained to us, was pretty much dependent on how dependent you were on them. Several officers told us many times that the victims were pretty much left and then came back a week later because there was no help for them. So, with South Carolina having historically been the number one state for domestic violence, you really have to begin questioning, where is the money actually going? Where is the help for victims? In Ashley's case, finally, she was ordered no contact with her two children that were her life. Um, as far as being a mother, she was an excellent mother. She was a mom, and we differentiate that. Um, Her children loved her. They enjoyed the gentleman that she had been with. Um, but her mom, from what we could tell and from what Ashley told us, just didn't want her to have those children or be with this individual because it put her above her mom. So, as it turned out, Ashley was arrested. She called this gentleman up to pick her up from jail in Kershaw County. He did. When he picked her up, she was completely, I don't know how to phrase it. She was completely out of it. He had no idea on how to help her at this point. His thought was to take her to a hospital and see what they could help her with. While there, she was rearrested and placed into a mental hospital for a week, where she was diagnosed with substance and alcohol psychosis and an undefined personality disorder. Now, one of the doctors that we spoke to on this actually told us that he felt the personality disorder belonged way before any of the trauma, that Ashley basically felt her body is her only worth. That's where the psychotic break goes to, and that she basically lunges at this individual who's trying to help her because that's how she reacts to it. That's how she understands it. She still messages him off and on just to keep that connection there. Um, from what we understand, the first time this happened, Ashley was taken to Shiraw, and her mom connected her with this individual, Christopher Webb. Chris Webb, as he is known, is from Spartanburg. He's well known in that area because he tried to run over the sheriff several years back while he was high on meth. Now, Christopher Webb is now sitting time in jail for child molestation on an 11-year-old. Ashley had intentions of being with this gentleman until it became very prominent that the young gentleman that she was with found out about this gentleman and made very quick work of it. After about a week of being with this gentleman, who, by the way, was also married and still having an affair with Ashley, he dropped her off at her mom's, where she spent one night and then returned to the gentleman she was with, and claiming to be pregnant with this gentleman's child. Well, they were together again for a few months, and then Ashley went back to her mom's. While at her mom's, the gentleman and Ashley spoke on the phone every night. She would send him pictures. They would talk on FaceTime and all this stuff. And they would talk about how they cared about each other and loved each other. Well, as the story went on, next thing we knew was they went to Colorado for a week. And when they returned, Ashley had began drinking nonstop. It got to the point where the gentleman just said he couldn't do it anymore. He had to figure out another aspect. Ashley went back to her mom's, and the exact day after she returned back to her mom connected her up with this gentleman. This gentleman is Brian Leslie out of Casey. This gentleman has a nice little drug history, is in his 50s, and has connections, from what we understand, from the Lexington County Sheriff's Department to possibly being access to date rape drugs. This lasted for a few months before he dropped her off at her mom's. And then Ashley naturally reached out to the gentleman that she had been with for the last 6 years. And then, in the brief conversation that went for a few months, she connected herself to someone new. We can only assume that the new individual follows along the same lines as the previous. So, when you talk about domestic violence or domestic abuse, you have to understand that there is more to this than just, physicality. There are so many things that go into a person that suffers from DV, and the consequences are so extreme. In Ashley's case, she's not the only one paying the price for her choices. Her children are paying the price for her choices. The relationship that she had started with this gentleman for 6 years is paying the price. She herself is paying a large price, while others are benefiting from this. So is the state of South Carolina actually doing what's right and protecting these victims? Most people will tell you no, that it's not. They're passing legislation left and right, but no one's actually making sure that the help is getting where it needs to be in any aspect. So how do you solve that? You go to your legislators, South Carolina, like I said earlier, is number one in domestic violence. Now, a lot of these numbers come from allegations, charges, They're not actual DV cases. Most of them actually arise in family courts in South Carolina, where domestic abuse is one of the 5 reasons you can actually get a divorce in South Carolina. So that's why it's so heavily used in the family court system. So none of those cases hardly ever rise to a criminal aspect. And not just as a journalist, but as a person, you would imagine that if there's actual physical or emotional or financial abuse going on, it would raise it to a criminal aspect. But not in family court, not in South Carolina. They hardly ever go past the family court system because there's too much money to be made re-victimizing a victim. So that's kind of where we at with this episode. There's so much information, we just didn't know what all to put out there. We do know that Ashley still has no contact with her kids. We do know that the individual still cares about her and wants to help her, wants to get her the help she needs. He's never stopped speaking to attorneys, from what he's told us. It's just hard to realize that when you picture on a subject matter this one and you just pick one person, all the other stories that are out there are similar. Some worse, some not so bad. They still all coincide with this one thing, that South Carolina fails its domestic abuse victims. And a lot of times these victims see no other out but to keep going down the rabbit hole to justify their outcomes. In Ashley's case, she chose to turn her back on her children because nobody was giving her help. Nobody's there for her. It's heartbreaking as a journalist to see stories like this. But we hope that Ashley understands that there are people who still care about her, who still want to help her. Just like every other victim, there's somebody out there willing to help, willing to stand by your side. So that is pretty much what we have for this episode. What we're going to do is there's going to be one every Sunday at 4 o'clock normally. We postpone it because of technical difficulties. But we're going to do it at 4 o'clock every Sunday. And we're going to choose one article or one topic. And you can call in and give us your take on these things. Give us your take on the extra. So normal journalism, yeah, yeah. As a journalist, we're not here to tell you what to think. We're here to tell you what the facts are. We're here to tell you who, why, what, and when. The opinions you make of that information is yours.